The Financial Times has done a very interesting article today, and one that frankly makes me makes me quite depressed. It begins the article by referring to a school called Ratcliffe College, one that I know very well, and it says at the start of this academic year, Ratcliffe College announced its transition to being an all Steinway school, symbolising a broader trend in the independent school sector towards luxury branding. And this phenomenon, while seemingly about pianos, highlights a larger issue: the evolution of private education from academic rigour, an Oxbridge preparation, for example, to an arms race of extravagance with Steinways, amphitheatres, and polo pitches. And this pivot coincides with Labour's government's decision to introduce a 20% VAT on private school fees, sparking debates about accessibility, ethics, and the priorities of these institutions as they grapple with Rachel Reeves. What is going to happen is that the private education will become for the very wealthy, and it will increase. Rachel Reeves' efforts will increase the division between the rich and the poor rather than decrease it. And that I find really depressing, when a school is measuring its success not by its academic merits, but by the facilities that are on offer. The Financial Times rightly criticises private schools for their competitive arms race in frivolity. Once accessible to middle-income families, schools are now catering predominantly to the ultra-wealthy. Facilities such as Bradfield College's Greek amphitheatre, once the site of really interesting experimentation with the Greek format in Greek, or Eton's Olympic rowing venue. These are emblematic of a sector where aesthetics and exclusivity overshadow academics, and these schools argue that such investments serve broader communities. But one must ask, is a Steinway truly essential for educational excellence, or is it a status symbol masquerading as necessity? By prioritising grandeur, these schools risk alienating the middle-income families and undermining their original mission of educational meritocracy. And in the case of Ratcliffe, it undermines completely its commitment to charity. Legis plenitudo caritas is the school motto. The introduction that charity overrides the law, that charity is greater than the law. The charity is the fulfillment of the law, depending on how you want to interpret that motto. The kindness is greater than anything that we can legislate. And that, I think, is important. And the introduction of the 20% VAT on fees has been met by resistance from private schools. But if it's met by resistance from private schools and Steinways at the same time, the private schools are sending out the wrong message. Those Steinways can be sold to provide bursaries and scholarships to appeal to the broader community, to help the local schools. The Steinways, this is a mistaken policy and a mistaken direction. The private schools are quite right that the VAT increase will force middle-class families out of the system. But the Institute for Fiscal Studies highlights that fees have risen by 55% over the past 2 decades, with elite institutions like Eton and Winchester charging upwards of $60,000 annually. And this inflation cannot be attributed solely to baseline costs, but also to the luxury branding that these schools have begun to pursue. Labour argues that VAT will generate $1.5 billion annually for state school investment, framing it as a corrective measure rather than a punitive measure. And critics question whether this policy punishes education or simply reflects an overdue response to a self-created exclusivity crisis. Parents traditionally send their children to private schools for the edge they provide in Oxbridge admissions. Yet today, particularly Oxford, has a bias against privately educated students. And the focus in these schools, if Ratcliffe is to be judged as an example, seems less on academic outcomes and more on luxury experiences, whether steinways or elite football coaching. Maybe that's something to do with the people who run these schools now. Rather than academics, it's ex-footballers. Nothing wrong with an ex-footballer, but is that what should be promoted as the person to be the icon of education? Lord Ralph Lucas notes that in his childhood, private schools were accessible to professionals like GPs and MPs, but this is no longer the case. The sector has strayed too far from its original purpose of academic excellence, and families tolerating the fees if the focus remains squarely on education rather than branding, that is where it should be. The problem is the focus has moved, and that I think is deeply regrettable, particularly given the fact that the grammar school system only exists in a few counties. The grammar school system, which prioritises excellence, and always was, incidentally, significantly better than the private school system in producing Oxford and Cambridge excellence. Peter Tate and Hugh Dickinson provide two contrasting perspectives. While some schools thrive by appealing to the ultra-rich, others struggle with unsustainable investments. The VAT levy forces schools to confront their identity crisis. Are they educators or purveyors of luxuries? Those who have maintained a desire for education are going to collapse under the Rachel Reeves VAT. Those who have moved on to branding are going to survive and probably thrive. Dickinson highlights that schools betting on luxury expansions often face financial ruin when demand falters, and this underscores the importance of balancing ambition with pragmatism, but they are more likely to escape the damage that the VAT levy will inflict on smaller schools that are prioritising support for SEND students, support for faith initiatives, support for poorer students, providing bursaries and scholarships. Those are the schools that are going to go under. While the VAT levy is intended to level the playing field, it risks unintended consequences. The additional tax burden will force mid-tier schools to close and lower-tier schools to close, exacerbating inequality by leaving only the wealthiest institutions standing. And meanwhile, state schools are likely to see immediate transformative benefits from VAT revenue if the policy works correctly. I'm not convinced it will, and therefore I think that hope that there will be transformative benefits is a misplaced hope. It will not happen, and this will therefore raise questions about the efficacious nature of the policy itself. The government's rhetoric of fairness overlooks the reality that private schools still play a vital role in accommodating SEND pupils and alleviating pressure on the state system and providing targeted faith education for specialist groups. The debate surrounding VAT on private schools and the obsession with luxury like Steinway's encapsulates a broader issue of misaligned priority. And I think going back to Ratcliffe College, which is how the Financial Times began its article, Ratcliffe College was founded by a group of priests from Italy, assembled by a man called Antonio Rosmini. And their mission was to the poor and to education. And I think Antonio Rosmini would be horrified by Antonio Rosmini and Luigi Gentili would be horrified by the direction that Ratcliffe College and its former prep school, Gracedieu, have taken in recent years, and this pitch for elitism sits ill with the ethos of faith.